Hello, my name is Mary Ringhoff, and I am here tonight to talk about the City of Palm Desert's Citywide Historic Context Statement and Historic Resources Survey. We contracted with the City of Palm Desert to do this work. And tonight I'll give a quick team introduction, an introduction to Historic Resources Survey, an overview of this project, a few preliminary findings as work is in progress, and then answer questions and collect information. Next slide. These are ARG stats. They kind of speak for themselves. So we do this work a lot. We're based in Los Angeles. Here's a picture of the City of Los Angeles, the Survey LA, Citywide Historic Resources Survey that we did for LA. These are some other cities that we've done this kind of work in. Next slide. And click through. Okay. So getting into the meat of it, what is a historic resources survey? And a caveat, the pictures on this slide and on most of the other slides are not of properties in Palm Desert because the project is still in progress. So we're not really ready to put up local properties yet. So these are just samples from some of our other cities that we've done work in. So a survey of this type is the process of identifying, documenting, and evaluating properties and neighborhoods that reflect the city's architectural, cultural, and social history. So it's pretty obvious, people usually think about buildings, but in addition to individual buildings and structures, historic resources can include sites like municipal parks or designed landscapes, objects like signs and public art, and historic districts, which are cohesive groupings of properties that together have historic significance. And Palm Desert is now in the first phase of the survey, and this includes the historic context statement and a citywide reconnaissance survey. So it's sort of the first step that you take. It's sort of the identification phase with the first broad brush is what this is, basically. Next slide. Why conduct a historic resources survey? The answer is a little bit different for every city because every city uses its results a little bit differently, but in most cases, the purposes of a survey are to inform planning decisions and provide baseline information for city planners and decision makers, to establish priorities for preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation efforts, to facilitate environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Just like natural resources, historic resources are something that are considered under CEQA. And then another purpose is to enhance awareness of and appreciation for the city's history and built environment. Next slide. How are survey findings used? They are used to identify properties and districts that appear potentially eligible for federal, state, or local designation. They're used to inform planning and land use decisions, like I said, and that is to ensure proper treatment of historic resources. And they really provide a starting point for anyone who might want to research or designate their property. If someone wants to find out more about their house, this is someplace that they can start with to see if it's already been identified. And a really common misconception is that a historic resources survey designates properties as historic landmarks, but this is not true. A survey simply identifies properties that are potentially eligible for future designation and provides the sort of baseline information that's needed to justify the identification, and then that can be built on with more research and evaluation. So this project will not be designating any landmarks or historic districts, and that is a completely separate process that requires a separate application, public notification, public participation, and review. Next slide. The basic components of a historic resources survey, there are 4 of them. They're based on national guidelines that are published by the National Park Service and National Register Bulletin 24, which is guidelines for local surveys. So the 4 main components are background research and outreach, the historic context statement, the reconnaissance survey, and the intensive survey. And it's really common for cities to phase their surveys. That's what Palm Desert is doing. So we're really just doing that first phase focused on identification. So that includes the first 3 components, but not the intensive survey and documentation component. Next slide. So at the next slide, we can get into more of the specifics of Palm Desert survey. This survey will include all properties within the city boundaries that were constructed before 1981. So that means that date cutoff means that any properties that the survey identifies as potentially eligible for designation will be a minimum of 45 years old at the conclusion of this survey phase in 2025. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Go back. I forgot to talk about outreach. The first step is to do the background research and the community outreach. So we start out with all the historic research that's already been done. So members of the the Historical Society of Palm Desert have already done a lot of research. So we were actually there today and we were talking to Rochelle McCune, and Luke has done a lot of this research as well, Luke Leuschner. And I forgot to mention again, for the recording and for the people on Zoom, the first time I talked quite a bit about Luke. He's a local expert and he's done a lot of research on the historic built environment of Palm Desert already. So part of background research is not just going to the Historical Society and doing newspaper research. It's also gathering information from members of the community because it's the people who live here who know the most about Palm Desert. So we really rely on you to guide us toward the properties that we should know about and the sources that will help tell the whole story of the city. And so this meeting is really just a small part of it. There are other ways to provide information or ask questions, and I'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Next slide. A historic context statement is a planning document that provides a framework for identifying potential historic resources and evaluating them according to established federal, state, and local criteria for designation. And this is our current outline for the Palm Desert context to show how these are typically organized. It's sort of context as the high level of the outline, and then theme is under each of those contexts. So as you can see, we're really looking at broad patterns of development in Palm Desert. And the context is not a comprehensive history of the project area or of the whole city, because it's really focused more on these broad patterns of development and how those patterns are conveyed by surviving buildings, structures, sites, and objects. So it's really tied to what still exists and not to those resources that aren't around anymore. Next slide. So the historic context statement informs the reconnaissance survey, and it's also informed by the reconnaissance survey. It's kind of a back and forth iterative process. The reconnaissance survey is sometimes called a windshield survey because we literally drive every accessible street in the city. We have paper maps, we have laptops and tablets, and those have a database of properties that we already have information on from research and outreach that we've already done. So as we do this drive, we keep track of every place we've been, and we note which properties appear potentially significant. And so we add those to our property list database. We also note which properties might not be around anymore. There might be something that research told us was there that maybe it's been demolished. We look at what kinds of alterations and additions might have happened. But really, it's sort of ground truthing the research that we've done. And we are not just looking at individual buildings, like I said, we're also looking at different resource types, and that includes groupings, which could be potential historic districts. So for this phase, what the project deliverables will be the up-to-date property database with all of that information compiled together, and maps of potentially eligible properties, along with the full historic context statement. Next slide. So the project schedule is about 8 months long in total. Our kickoff with the city was in July. We had our public kickoff meeting with the CRPC in late August, and the project is projected to wrap up around the end of March 2025. So the schedule's been kind of dependent on some city scheduling and noticing for community meetings, and all these phases, it's not really a straight line like it looks here because there's a lot of bouncing back and forth. We do more research and then we go do more reconnaissance survey, and then maybe we see more properties that we need to do more research on. And so it's a lot of back and forth. And the historic context development is being developed in that same kind of back and forth process. So where the arrow is kind of where we are now. We are developing the historic context statement. We've done most of our general background research. We're doing more focused property-specific research now on properties that are on our list, and we're doing reconnaissance surveys still. So we've already done a few days of reconnaissance. We started that back in the late summer, and Brandon and I are actually going to be, we were driving around today, and we're going to be driving around tomorrow to field check some more properties that we have information on, but we haven't ground truthed yet. Next slide, please. So like I said, this work is still very much in progress, but we're starting to pull some findings together. So I can just share a few preliminary observations. This is our development chronology map, which I know might be kind of hard to see, but it shows the known construction dates. That was just the raw data that we got from the county assessor. A lot of these dates have been refined as we've been able to do more research. This is just what we started out with at the beginning of the project. So what we're finding so far is really just a handful of earlier properties, and by earlier, I really just mean pre-1945, that reflect Palm Desert's first big period of development, so Palm Village and other sources from that era. There's really not very many that are left intact. There's been a lot of alterations and losses over the years. And these earlier properties are the darker the color up there, the dark purple and the dark blue, those are the older properties. But I think, as you all know, the built environment, what it most strongly reflects are the post-war development patterns that were started by the Palm Desert Corporation and then diversified with other developers. So the majority of properties that we're identifying to this point are basically mid-50s to late 60s, early 70s. We're not finding, we have identified multiple groupings of single-family residences, which could possibly be historic districts. Not as many as we had expected, but still a few. And then on the other hand, multifamily residential properties are very common. There's a lot of very well-preserved complexes of, duplexes and up. A lot of good mid-century modern and late modern architecture, both single-family houses, multifamily residences, commercial properties, and some really good institutional examples. Next slide. So we were lucky to have a lot of existing research to start with by Luke and by the Historical Society of Palm Desert. And we're finding that a lot of these properties that were already identified do remain intact enough to be included in the survey and are on the property list. So these are just a few examples of more of the kind of typical and expected properties that we figured that we would see. The aerial on the bottom left, that's the Edgar Bergen House from 1937, originally the Seton House. This is one of the oldest residences left in Palm Desert, possibly the oldest intact residence. It's now surrounded by a mobile home park, and you can't see it from the public right-of-way. And believe me, we tried every way that we could, but our research indicates that it is intact. So that's a good example of early Palm Desert development. Then on the top right, we have another example of later development. That's Marrakesh Country Club, developed 1969 to 1974 by John Lawson and Ted Robinson. Everyone knows Marrakesh with the pink buildings, so the John Elgin Wolfe designs, and then the current clubhouse building, which was designed by Robert Ricciardi. And so this is a really good, it's sort of a, excellent and exceptional example, but it's a good example of the kind of highly planned country club development that was characterizing Palm Desert at that time period. The bottom right is a single family residence. It's a nice mid-century modern residence designed by Walter White. It's from 1957. So this is just an example of one of the many good examples of single family residential architecture that remains here. And then the top left is the Palm Desert Community Presbyterian Church on Highway 74, designed by Powell, Morgridge, Richards, and Coughlin, built by Burton Lamb. People know it best, perhaps, by the fact that the fundraising was led by Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower, and it was completed in 1968. So this is just an example of some of the really nice late modern architecture that remains in Palm Desert. Next slide. And then we're also identifying some more unusual or unexpected property types. So I'm just going to share two of them. This first one is the International Motor Lodge. This is on El Camino, right behind the Highway 111. And this is an unusual property type for Palm Desert. Everyone knows about the low scale, apartment buildings and motels with around a pool. But this is just this line of larger buildings. This was built in two phases in 1963 and 1964. It's now a condominium complex. So this is this aerial view is basically to the east. So there's 7 identical 2-story buildings, and according to that article on the right, it had Palm Desert's first Fire Island swimming pool. Next slide. This is another one that we thought was really interesting, late modern architecture, and this is the kind of thing that sometimes it takes some convincing as time marches on. I myself was late to appreciate late modernism. I'm now really a fan. But this is, it was Plaza Taxco, which is one of several late modern commercial complexes designed by Paul Thorick and built by Kurt Dunham. This is from the late 1970s, completed in 76. And so this is a good example of some of the later modernist designs that continued to characterize Palm Desert between the late 60s and the early 1980s. Next slide. And that's basically it for my overview of what the survey is and how it's going. We really encourage the community to let us know what they think we should know for this project. So on the next slide, I think there's more contact information, but there's the Engage Palm Desert site has updated information on what's happening with the project, and it also has there's a place on the website where you can submit comments or questions. Carlos gets those and he sends them to us. So when people recommend properties and things like that, we're able to put it on our list and then do our research and our reconnaissance survey. So you can use that feedback form. You can also email Carlos directly. There's his email address right there. You can come to the planning department and let them know there, send a letter, send an email, or ask the CRPC because they're also up on what we've been doing. So that's pretty much it. We can have Q&A. Let's just leave this slide up in case anyone wants to use it to look at the project website. But I thank you for your time tonight, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Nice to meet you. Nice. Great.
One is years ago, Palm Desert Library on national building permits.
If they're the ones that Luke has on his Google Drive, yep. Yes, thank you. Yeah, should I repeat?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me repeat for the people on Zoom in case they didn't hear. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but I know you're with Craig. Okay. So representative from Preservation Mirage is here, and first he wanted to let us know about the cache of building permits that was found. So yes, we do have those, and those are, I don't know if they're publicly available or not, but okay. So the Rancho Mirage Planning Department, if you contact Ben Torres, they have a zip drive and they will share. This is really just It's my understanding that these were just permits that were found in a county office that were going to be thrown out. Is that? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we've used them really heavily. So yeah, Craig just wanted to make sure that people were aware of this resource because it's because both Palm Desert and Rancho Mirage were incorporated so late. A lot of the building records were with Riverside County, which apparently once a city incorporates, sometimes they get those records and sometimes they don't. So luckily, those have been saved. So either you or Luke might be able to chime in. I don't remember the full date range, but it covered the 60s. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Mary,
Craig's, yeah.
oh, sorry. Luke wanted to say roughly 1955 to 1966.
Okay.
And then I also have a question on Zoom when you're ready for that.
Okay. Yeah. So Luke confirmed roughly 1955 to 1966. Thank you, Luke. Craig had one other question, which is whether we were looking at historic signage or anything sort of unusual, those sort of objects. One interesting thing that we found that Rochelle told us about at the Historical Society is that apparently in 1979, the city decided to have a sign ordinance that called for the removal of neon, and it looked like really any illuminated or large signs. We saw a picture of a taxidermy shop that used to have a deer head up out front, and they had to take that down. So because of that, we really didn't find aside from the original signage on multifamily residential complexes and some motels and things like that. Not a lot of standalone. But if you know of any that we should be looking for. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's value to the property owner as well because it's such a well-known sign. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, what we did is the city helped us out with that. So they were able to provide contact information. Oh, sorry, I need to repeat your question. Craig asked about, he mentioned that in the previous survey of Rancho Mirage in 2002, there are so many gated properties, country clubs, that the survey was pretty incomplete because they weren't able to get access. So he was asking what the process is for getting access to those kind of properties. And yeah, what we did was the city has helped out by providing contact information for the managers of the HOAs and various property managers. So we had a list of all of the gated communities that we knew, was of a certain age and needed to be investigated. So that's part of what we were doing today. I think El Dorado is actually not within the city limits. Yeah, it was on our list initially, and then I was told it's Indian Wells. So we were, yeah, so we sent out I sent out an email to all of them and followed up with phone calls. So There's a couple I haven't been able to reach yet, so there may be some, but it'll be a handful. I mean, I really think it'll be like 2 or 3, and I think we're going to be able to see the others. So that's exciting. Yeah, we anticipated that really being a problem. So it's helpful. The city's been a really great partner in getting us in there. So was there another question on Zoom?
Yes, I have a resident who believes that their house is an undiscovered Walter S. White. Who should they contact about that?
They can email Carlos. The email address that's, oh, do I need to repeat that? Does their question go up?
Nope, they can hear.
They can hear you, okay. Yeah, email that information to Carlos. That's very exciting. I would like to see that property. If you can send it to him tonight, we can go look at it tomorrow. And thank you. I would ask for the address, but you probably don't want to give it out in front of everybody in a meeting.
Currently, there are no other questions on Zoom.
Yeah, David. Yep. So David, this is David Toltzman with the Historical Society. He was asking in our reconnaissance survey how we're able to recognize when significant alterations have taken place. And all I can say is sometimes it's easier than other times. You know, and the thresholds kind of differ depending on whether we're looking at something as architecturally significant as an individual property, whether we're looking at it as a potential contributor to a potential historic district, or whether we're looking at it for association with sort of broader patterns of events or as the home of a significant person. So if it's something that we would be looking at for architectural significance, the threshold is relatively high. So it doesn't have to be completely intact, you know, and in most cases you have garage doors changed out. You might have some windows changed out. You might have a security door or something like that. But really, as long as it doesn't have everything replaced or a big addition on the front or window openings altered, a lot of times people will enlarge the openings of the windows. It's something that we would consider. But if it has major alterations or cumulatively a lot of smaller alterations that together detract from its ability to convey its historic character, then that's when we would decide it was too altered. And that's not always something we can identify from the street. Like we've done this in enough places that there are some things that we can spot right away, but other things it's hard to tell. So we write that down to go back and do more research and try and figure out what happened. Oh, okay. Uh-huh. I'm afraid so. Yeah. Yeah, it would that sounds pretty bad. Yeah. Yeah, so he was asking about a property in Purple Hills Estates that has had, sounds like some pretty significant alterations. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Craig is asking if we would, if there's a scenario where we would include properties on the property list that perhaps have lost a lot of integrity but are places of significance. And the answer is there's a couple of answers to this. One is that it kind of depends on the property itself. For example, the Desert Magazine building is relatively altered, but we're keeping it on the property list because it was such a significant place in the history of Palm Desert. The other aspect of this is that in the reconnaissance survey, you're really doing it's really like broad, shallow research and identification. So we're eliminating ones that are clearly, so altered that they have no integrity and they can't convey their significance unless it's something like the Desert Magazine building. But then in the intensive level survey, that's when there's more deeper research done. And when you're documenting a building, you're standing in front of it for half an hour and you start noticing things you might not have noticed before. But even with that, even if it were the narrowed down list, from the reconnaissance list to the intensive documentation list, it gets narrowed down quite a bit. Even in the intensive list, a lot of times, like in a survey, you still can't do the amount of research that you would need to do. Like if someone wanted to do a nomination or if they wanted to do a rehabilitation project, it would still take additional research and review. So the survey, even the intensive level survey is really just here's as much information as we can give on a large scale. Correct. Yeah. If a house is not on the list, that doesn't mean it can't be nominated. This is really, a lot of this is just useful for the planning department to have. So the planner at the counter has the list to know which properties are, maybe should be flagged. Yeah. If someone comes and wants to demolish or yeah. So, but there's a lot of flexibility and we get that question a lot because people worry about, oh, my neighborhood was not identified as a potential district, but it's like it can still be nominated, and it's up to the committee and the work that's done afterward. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so he's talking about the example of Johnny Dawes as a significant individual in Rancho Mirage. So that's a really good example of his house, because you're looking at it for its association with a significant individual, the threshold for integrity is a little bit lower. So it might have more alterations than something that's being looked at for its architectural significance.
Marion, just so you know, I do have a phone number for the resident who is at the Walter S. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
great.
But I do have the number.
Yeah, I guess. We'll be there at sunrise. Well, yeah. Yeah.
In regards to the celebrity.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the original homeowner. The standard is usually it would have to be a property where someone spent a significant amount of time. So if it's someone who has 10 houses and they happen to have one in Palm Desert and they were there, every once in a while, maybe not. But and it's it also one of the other criteria considerations is that it be within the person's productive period, quote unquote, which is broadly interpreted. But it can be, it doesn't have to be the original owner. Any other questions? Okay, if we don't have any more on Zoom, I think we are done. And thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time.